Hi, friends. I'm Heidi M., and I'm sitting with filmmaker and writer Paris Zarcilla. Nice to meet you, Paris.
Lovely to meet you. Thanks for having me, Heidi.
It's such a pleasure. I normally start by asking folks to tell us a little bit about themselves, maybe a little bit about you, your background, and also your foray into writing and filmmaking.
Yes, wow, big one there. So, hello everyone. My name is Paris Zarcilla. I'm the writer and director of my debut film called Raging Grace. I was born in the UK to two Filipino immigrant parents called Hill and Antonia. And My gosh, yeah, childhood was chaotic, but they raised me as best as they can. I don't think they really wanted me to be a filmmaker, but they're happy. It's going seemingly well on this end, especially with the release of Raging Grace. But it's good to talk about my parents because they really did inspire this film,
Mm-hmm.
especially the experiences that my mum had when she first came to this country, and in the early days while she was still domestic worker for a lot of families here in the UK. And when I was a young kid, she was when we didn't have a babysitter, she would actually take me to some of her jobs, whether that was cleaning someone's house or temporarily looking after someone's kid. It exposed me to a very, very, very different world. I always knew my mom as someone who was, deeply confident about who she was, but
Right.
seeing her in these spaces was had a profound impact on me, especially when, I saw someone, um, talk down to her in a
Mm-hmm.
way that I'd never ever seen. Um, and I know for my parents, they did not want us or myself to go through any kinds of these racial hardships. So whether they knew it or not, I think the lessons that they taught us, which was very much forged in a place of survival, was to assimilate. Get the good grades,
Mm-hmm.
excel, but don't stick out, don't ruffle any feathers. The idea that the nail that sticks out gets hammered. Um, and I had realized in 2020 during the pandemic when this film was written that I'd spent 30 years of my life essentially living by these hardened rules where I'd rejected my mother tongue, my heritage,
Right.
trying to seek white approval because that's what it meant to survive and to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, I had realized in that time that I didn't know who I was. I was having an identity crisis. And 2020 was a big year. It was a very chaotic year. And With the rise of open aggression towards East and Southeast Asians, especially here in the UK and especially over in the US,
Right.
it was it was really, really difficult to see unfolding. And we had a government who had were stoking the flames of
Right.
these aggressions. They
Mm-hmm.
had a very toxic rhetoric towards immigrants, the very immigrants that were supporting a very beleaguered, underfunded, under resourced National Health Service. And
Mm-hmm.
these immigrants were often Filipino nurses and doctors who were dying on the front line, you know, protecting the British public. And I have to say that everything that those 30 years that those 6 months in the year of 2020 inspired an incandescent rage in me that I thought
Mm-hmm.
was deeply dangerous. And I needed a way to be able to express that safely. And on the page is where I first began Raging Grace.
Thank you for putting it into context, right? Because a lot of the times we go into a cinema or we're streaming and, we understand there's cultural references in film, but we don't always understand where they come from. And I think what you just told us is really pivotal in understanding Grace, the actual child in the film, but
Mm.
also her mother Joy, who a great casting, by the way. I had mixed feelings some of the way, and that makes sense. When I react to characters in both good and not so good feelings, I think it's really a testament to the good cast that you have. But
Yeah.
also kudos to obviously the four cast members. So
Mm.
given that you put pen to paper and this is what has come out, you know, amidst COVID precautions, how did you go about scouting your location? Because I was my understanding is it's also set in a kind of a gothic horror element, bit of psychological thriller, a little supernatural. So there's different elements that you're working with. And I think obviously the house that it's set in finally is a very important component.
Mm. Yes, I mean the house, especially the Gothic house, which is such a staple for so many horror films, was an incredibly important character location for this film. It was so representative and symbolic of British colonialism, the oppressive structural society that a lot of POCs, East and Southeast Asians find themselves in, um, are in awe of, but also feel like they
Mhm.
cannot progress.
Right.
And the Gothic house was, it just, it felt like the perfect sort of mechanic to be able to, embody a story about immigrants and the children of the diaspora who want to belong, you know, uh, um, but no matter what it is they do, they feel that out like outsiders, strangers.
Mhm.
Um, and it took us a while to be able to find the right place. Um, but it's strange because there are so many of these houses in the UK,
Of course.
these aristocratic houses from families of landed gentry, but so many of them have become wedding venues, because it's extraordinarily expensive to maintain these places. But what we did find, um, to our horror, actually, once we had already begun filming, was that it was a holiday home of Boris Johnson, the
Oh,
prime minister at the
wow.
time. I know it. This house had so many layers to it.
Mhm.
As traumatic as it was to film in there for over 4 weeks, the experience really bonded us as a crew. It
Mhm.
also really emboldened us, as a crew who were mostly, POC and East and
Right.
Southeast Asian and queer. Um, we felt emboldened because this was a place that 100 years ago, none of us would ever have been allowed to set foot in. So
Mhm.
it became imperative to us to express our anger, our rage, through creativity,
Mhm.
um, in a place that felt very, very, very oppressive.
Interesting.
Um, mm,
Yeah, no, it's very interesting because you often see these sort of pieces in other stories like Howard's End and very more romanticized, I guess, if you will. Um, I alluded to the casting, so I wanted to talk to you about what were those discussions after to put it in context for anyone who's going to watch or listen to this. Joey is a single parent in the UK. They're trying to make ends meet so that their daughter Grace can have a future in that country. But she takes this job in a place that you mentioned that is too good to be true. So once you had your casting, you had Max and Jaden Page, Leanne and David, the four key members of the story. What were those discussions about once you were in the house and what was going to transpire there? How collaborative it was.
yes, well. it needed to be collaborative off the bat. When I cast, these really, really brilliant individuals, they were cast because of what they brought to the characters beyond my own imagination.
Mm-hmm.
They were cast also because of how each one of them understood the responsibility that came with portraying each one of these characters. Joy, for instance, and Grace are the first, British Filipino characters to take center stage in a first British Filipino film ever.
Mm-hmm.
Also, they are representing a very specific lived experience, of an undocumented domestic worker and a child of the diaspora. Um, Also with, actors Leanne Best and David Heyman. What I loved about them and the discussion we all had was the characters they were going to embody were going to be saying and doing things that many of us in the cast and the crew have heard and
Mm-hmm.
have caused us a great deal of pain. And, Leanne is someone who has is so well read on the subject matters of, you know, um, British colonialism, but also very specifically the failure of white feminism in this
Mm-hmm.
modern world. And how eloquent she was able to speak about these things and know the duty of care that she had not only to this character, but to the rest of the cast and crew.
Right.
Likewise with David.
Mm-hmm.
So it was all about how to, create the environment where all of us could best do our best work.
Mm-hmm. You know, and it shows on screen, by the way. I also was curious about why the premise of genre. What is it that allows you to work within these elements of gothic horror, psychological thrillers, and including supernatural elements? What was it about these elements that allow you to perhaps have more freedom to discuss these themes?
Well, something I want to address specifically too is, there aren't any supernatural elements, although that's what it alludes to.
Ah,
What
yes,
the one of the reasons I avoided that was because, the real horror is real life.
the behaviors of people.
Exactly. The
Mhm.
experiences of, you know, this undocumented immigrant. Um, One of the things I absolutely love about genre, throughout the ages, and especially the films made today, is the tools that it has given us as filmmakers
Mhm.
to address very nuanced subject matters, and it gives us a microphone to do it. Um, and however fantastical some of those however fantastical it may come across in the film,
Mhm.
you know, the real horror is in the everyday lived experiences of the micro and macro aggressions that so many of us
Mhm.
have felt. You know, people often ask why horror?
Right.
Because immigrant experiences, especially ones of people who take up the jobs of domestic worker, are often horrific.
Exactly.
And it felt like a very natural direction for this film to take. But one thing I do want to stress, it isn't just about the horror. You
Mhm.
know, this wasn't just a permission for me to feel rage, you know,
Right.
to express anger and frustration on the screen. Rage lacks nuance. And what I wanted was to be able to transgress that, move into a place of joy and
Mhm.
celebration, because we need it. We need it amongst the horrors of these experiences, the horrors that we we go through daily in this life. We need hope. So more than anything, I really want people to be able to take that away. You know, I want them to be able to experience the cathartic spectacle that this film is. You know, for things that there has often not been language around. Yeah.
No, I think that's a great summary. I'm getting my heads up that we're going to run out of time, and I knew we were going to run out of time because there's so much I want to ask. But I think you wrap it up nicely, because I also want to highlight that even there are other elements in the film that are celebratory. There is traditional music or instruments embedded in sound design and scoring, and there is a towards the end there's a really nice, like you said, celebratory, joyous occasion. So I think I'm going to leave it there, Paradise. Thank you so much for speaking with me. The story is so relatable to many of us, whether we are from the Philippines or not. So congratulations on your festival run and the release that's happening now. I'm very much looking forward to what audiences are saying.
Oh, thank you so much. And if I may just say, I really appreciate that this is a film that's managed to resonate with you beyond the specificity of Filipino
Absolutely.
culture. You know, this is a film that, you know, so many of us have proximity to, you know, people who have worked, you know, for others in houses, who have often been on the receiving end of a lot of these aggressions. But thank you for having me. And I hope for anyone watching, you all find your own way to rage gracefully. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you again. Pleasure.